Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Paulitics Show. Before today's episode begins, I quickly want to note on two quick things. First, I want to note on why I didn't upload last week, and it's simply because currently I'm enrolled in a summer course. And before I can upload new quality content for you all to watch and to view, I wanted to make sure that my schoolwork was in order. So I decided to take a week off. And second, this video that you're about to watch, this podcast you're about to listen to, is on the basis of policing policy in the United States, the institution of the police departments and things of that sort. And you may find it similar to episode 5 of the Paulitics Show, which covered the Black Lives Matter protests and riots and lootings, as well as racism in the United States. And frankly, it may be true that there is some overlap between episodes. However, I realized when I was watching last week's episode that, frankly, I didn't offer any solutions, and I wanted to remedy that with this episode. So today, I plan on offering some solutions that could solve the issue of policing in the United States. So without any more to say in this introduction, let's jump into it. First, I want to go ahead and start with a policy position I don't necessarily agree with, and that comes in the form of defunding the police. Defunding the police means defunding the police. It doesn't mean abolishing the police, and I think it's fairly obvious that defund does not mean abolish. Although there have been some figureheads, such as Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity on Fox News, who happen to believe otherwise.
The real problem is that the rioting in some rare places is being stopped by police. And their aim is to fix that. They would like to eliminate all law enforcement for good.
The left psychotic so-called solution now to all the violence and all the anarchy and all the lawlessness and all the looting and all the arson and violence is let's get rid of the police altogether, because that is apparently now their new battle cry. They want to abolish police officers.
So now that we have realized that there have been slandering of this movement to defund the police, let's go ahead and actually break down what it means. And frankly, what it means is let's divert some money away from the police institutions and give it to social institutions in need. So in the United States, from state and local governments, police departments around the country receive $115 billion total. People who believe in defunding the police, the protesters believe that the money should go to education, should go to mental health counseling, job training, substance abuse counseling and treatment. They believe that it should go to these social institutions as to alleviate the issue of racism and alleviate the institutions that have left this sin upon our nation. But why should we defund the police? And the answer is actually quite simple. If you look at police spending from the year 1977 to the year 2020, well, in 1977, police departments around the nation were receiving $42 billion from state and local governments. In the year 2020, they're receiving $115 billion. That's a substantial increase, when in fact, crime has actually dropped. So when you have a lower crime rate, the expectation is not to pump up spending. In fact, it would be, let's maintain or lower the spending rather than implement more spending and overspend in this particular area. But it also means we should defund the police in order to alleviate the element of racism in this country. In the United States, 18.7% of our spending goes towards the social institutions. So as I said, education, affordable housing, job training, and things like that. However, when you go to another country, our European counterparts, such as Germany, well, Germany gets 25.1% of its budgets set towards social spending, social institutions. But if you go over to France, that number's 31.2%, which is substantially higher, nearly twice the amount that we spend towards social institutions. And, before we go any further about why we should defund the police, there's often this fallacy that exists, that if we defund the police, the United States would become a country of anarchy, it would become a nation of misfits and delinquents and riots and lootings and arson and all this terrible crime. Well, I don't necessarily believe that we are inherently safer when we overspend on institution of the police. Let's utilize Canada as a prime example. Canada spends drastically less than the United States on the issue of policing. However, the chart you're currently looking at is in the millions. Just keep that in mind. The U.S. has a 4 times murder rate compared to Canada. So they spend drastically less than our $115 billion, yet we have a higher murder rate. But you might be saying, oh, well, that's not adjusting for population sizes and things like that. That's valid, that's fair. So let's go ahead and adjust for population sizes and look at Denmark for a prime example. When we look at Denmark and compare per 100,000 people, we see that the United States has 4 times the number of rape crimes compared to Denmark. And they have drastically less spending when it comes to police than the United States. So just because we spend more on police doesn't inherently make us a safer society. It doesn't inherently alleviate our sins. It doesn't necessarily do anything bad to worsen those sins, those crimes, but it also doesn't mean that we're inherently a safer society. So let me provide very quickly on why I disagree with these defund the police calls and protests and things of that nature. Well, I disagree with the notion of defunding the police for a very simple reason. I look at it and I say, why can't we do both? Why can't we both why do we have to defund the police and not pay for social institutions? We have the money to pay for social institutions. We can take money away from military spending. We can take money away from corporate subsidies and anything like that and put it towards our people. We can put it back to the in terms of social spending. We have the ability to do that. We don't need to defund the police in addition to funding other areas of our society, such as these social institutions. We don't have to do both. It's not a binary answer. We very simply can keep funding the police while funding social institutions. But as I said, this episode is going to be an episode about defining what I want in terms of policy solutions, policy proposals, and things of that nature. So in order to begin, let me first begin with a Campaign Zero. Campaign Zero is a website that came about in 2015 that released a laundry list of policy solutions that, in order to alleviate the issue of bad policing in this country. Now, in the description of this video, I'm going to make sure to link the Campaign Zero reforms, their policy solutions, and everything like that. They are truly a phenomenal website that everyone should take a read from. Whether you agree or disagree with the solution, you will have ammunition to fuel your next argument about defund or to not defund the police. It's a phenomenal website that I'm going to make sure to put in this description of this video. But as I said, Campaign Zero came out with a laundry list of solutions and policy proposals that range from community oversight to representation to more extensive, better, and longer training. Instead of taking 8 hours to get your weapon, you take longer, you have to pass tests and things like that. That police must wear mandated body cameras that cannot be turned off, or to independently investigating and prosecuting police officers. That was another proposal done by the Campaign Zero reforms. But as Ben Mathis put it in a Slate article, with this site, Campaign Zero is saying to mainstream politicians, here are some products that you've been sold before. Now, do your job. And this is very simply true. Reforms that are posted on the Campaign Zero website are reforms that have been done all throughout this country. But Campaign Zero is different. They believe that these policy proposals that have been done throughout this country, that have worked and benefited the black, brown community, and just people in general that have been targets of bad policing, well, it says, let's do them on the federal level. Let's make sure that every police department is held accountable. So, as I said, the Campaign Zero has a laundry list, and I mean an absolute multi-faceted list that ranges from a variety of different things. So in this episode, we're going to be covering 4 main tenets of this list. And first, we're going to be and throughout this episode, we'll be covering ending broken window policing, and for-profit policing, demilitarizing the police, and renegotiating police union contracts. In order to begin this episode, we're actually going to go ahead and start with the third one, because it allows us to go down the list and easily segues into the next one. So as I said, we're going to start with demilitarizing the police, and that actually, the calls for that began in 1990 and 1991 under George H.W. Bush. And this was done with the National Defense Authorization Act, which allowed certain pieces of military equipment to be utilized by a police force. And this included weaponized vehicles, this included specialized purpose vehicles, military weapons such as grenade launchers, bayonets, and .50 calibers. However, in 1997, the affirmation of the National Defense and Authorization Act was passed under the Bill Clinton administration. And to quote the law itself, this act allows all law enforcement agencies to acquire property on bona fide law enforcement purposes and their assist to arrest and apprehension mission. However, this law is flawed in and of itself. It's flawed because what is real, the bona fide part of the law, it's never defined, which thus allows unrestricted militarization of the police within guidelines of the law. So, if I am doing a drug raid, in other words, I can go ahead and use the militarized equipment. If I hypothetically, if I were to see a person jaywalking, I can then use the militarized equipment. It basically says police should be replaced by military if they choose to accept the equipment the federal government is giving them from the Department of Defense. However, in 2014, after the death of Michael Brown, the Obama administration established limitations on what and how much military equipment could be taken from the Department of Defense. For instance, the Obama administration said that police departments cannot have tanks. They said that they cannot have .50 caliber guns, they cannot have bayonets or grenade launchers, high military weapons, and things like that sort. They can still have gas masks and face shields and things of that nature, but they couldn't have the artillery, they couldn't have the weaponry. However, the Trump administration in 2017, under Attorney General Jeff Sessions, said that no, this executive order should be repealed, so the Trump administration did just that. They repealed this executive order and allowed police departments to once again be able to get these weapons under the Defense Authorization Act from 1997. And let me just go ahead and make a brief statement on why we should go ahead and demilitarize the police now that we're given the background. When you are given a hammer, everything is going to look like a nail. Especially when you have not been trained how and when to use the hammer. If you've been just given it and told, hey, we're not going to teach you how to use it, we're not going to teach you when to use it, just use it when you see fit. Well, then the answer is, I'm going to use it to anything that looks like a problem. So, a study conducted by doctors of political science at the University of Cincinnati and the University of Tampa in Florida found that when police departments are given military weaponry and equipment, it is more likely that people are going to be killed, assaulted, harassed, or injured as a result by the police. And this is done on the basis of cultural changes that will occur. When people are given the option to do something quickly and effectively to almost get it over with, you'll choose the quickest, most effective option. So in this particular instance, police are now equipped with this military-grade weaponry to quickly silence people, quickly get people out of the picture, quickly dismiss the problem as a whole. Rather than actually not negotiating, but talking down the situation instead of raising the fire and making things worse. They're escalating the situation, not de-escalating it. and this comes over the fact that they would choose to get it over with quickly. Comes from this psychological law that exists called the law of the instrument, which says that there could be no better instrument to utilize, but the one that you are holding seems best. And we tend to form solutions to what is in our hand. So we've all heard that famous saying that I said earlier. If you have a hammer, everything's going to look like a nail. And that's exactly true. That's what the law of the instrument says. That you are going to use whatever you most readily know and whatever seems to be the most efficient. In this particular case, the hammer is military weaponry and that can easily, and for lack of better terms, shut people up. But what can be done? How can we go about alleviating this problem of demilitarizing the police? And the answer for that is actually quite simple. You can have your state or locality ban certain militarized items. You can ban the use of SWAT teams unless approved by the executive of the locality. So, for instance, the mayor or perhaps the governor of the state. And if a person's life is in danger, that's the only time it can be used. So it's a bifold process. A person's life must be at stake, and it must be approved by an executive in order to use SWAT teams and some militarized equipment. And if the department has a history of discriminatory practices, the purchase of military-grade weaponry altogether should be banned. You should not, if you have a practice of racial bias or gender bias or whatever bias it might be, and it's been proven by outside investigators, you should not have access. The department should not have access for that military weaponry until the bias issue has been resolved. And finally, if possible, give back the equipment to the federal government. This has been done in several cities, several localities, but most prominently, I believe it was in San Diego, where the city gave back a 13-ton armored tank back to the Department of Defense because they saw what happened in 2014, a year of the Black Lives Matter movement and Ferguson and all of that. So they wanted to remedy the situation. They didn't want to provoke anything. So they wound up giving back the 13-ton armored vehicle to the Department of Defense. But as I said, I'm going to be covering multiple things throughout this show today. And the second thing I'm going to be covering is ending broken windows policing. And you might be asking yourself, well, I've never heard of that. What is that? And the answer is actually quite simple. It's a theory in criminology that suggests that urban areas, particularly urban areas, are a perfect designated area in order to provoke crime rates to rise. So urban areas are inherently going to be more crime-ridden than suburban and rural areas. And it suggests that the way to alleviate this would be to more heavily police minor crimes, such as jaywalking, loitering, trespassing, disturbing the peace, homelessness, and marijuana possession. Now, I'm going to have a full episode in the future about marijuana possession in and of itself, so I need not cover that right here and right now. That will be covered in the future episode. But marijuana possession is a minor crime. It's not the act of smoking, it's about the act of actually having it on your person. And, policing those minor crimes are done in order to make the area, the neighborhood, more lawful. But in reference to marijuana policy in particular, the 1997 National Defense Authorization Act justified the use of the militarization of police in order to bust suspected drug possession. So the police department can bust into your house utilizing military gear, SWAT gear, in order to bust you for having ounces of marijuana on you. Frankly, that's absurd. You don't need that kind of, weaponry, artillery, equipment in order to bust into someone's house. And these are from minor crimes too. And, and as of one of the effects of suburbanization of the 1960s, people of color tend to live in the cities more frequently than white people. So when we have these things that are particularly done in urban cities and urban areas, Well, the fact of the matter is it's going to more harshly impact people of color, the black and brown community. But I next also want to go ahead and talk about this concept of profiteering, for-profit policing. And this one is a fairly simple reform that can be done, that's been proposed by Campaign Zero. And the answer, and what happened is, only 20 states in the United States have a ban on ticket quotas. And, for example, Massachusetts is one of them. However, in an investigation done a few years ago, they found that the Accident and Injury Reduction Effort, a overtime program in Massachusetts, the state, found that it mandated police officers need to get 8 to 10 citations per air shift in order to get overtime pay. So it was mandating a ticket citation quota that police are profiteering off of people's suffering. Now, quotas in police departments should be banned in general. I don't think I should need to. I think that's, and for lack of better terms, the duh position. We shouldn't have quotas for police officers because that makes them go out of their way to look for crime and that sort, whereas police officers should be doing it if it's seen or if they have a suspicion, not going out of their way to look for something that may or may not be there. But another way the police profiteer off of people has to do with civil asset forfeiture. And for those of you that don't know what civil asset forfeiture is, it's basically that if you are involved in a crime scene, for instance, you get pulled over, you are seen to have marijuana in your car or drug paraphernalia, or in some cases, in some states, you're not allowed to drive with open bottles of alcohol. It is possible, it is legal for police to take your car and to seize it, to seize your civil assets. And you can obviously, if you're found not guilty, you could go get your stuff back. However, the burden is not on the police department to give you your stuff back. The burden is on you, the person who is in essence being robbed, to go get your stuff back. So when we talk about civil asset forfeiture, why is this legal? Because even in instances where people are found found guilty, the police aren't necessarily spending the money the correct way. For instance, and I'll never forget this story, so if I can find the article, I'll make sure to go put it in directly right here. But in one case, police officers were found buying a clown, renting out a clown for, I believe it was a birthday party, and did a $21,000 beach party to prevent drug use. Now, these are gross misuses of police money. I think in one instance they also purchased a coffee maker for over $600. These are gross misuses of money by police departments when they seized civil assets, when they seized people's money for doing nothing wrong in some cases, because in most cases people who get their assets seized don't wind up getting their items back because the process to get everything back is long and judicious. It takes such a long time. It's oftentimes easier to just not and forget about the whole process. But as I said, there's going to be one last area in today's video on Campaign Zero reforms, for policing reforms, that I'm going to be talking about, and that has to do with police union contracts. I'm sure many of you have heard this be thrown out in the news recently, and frankly, there are some barriers that need to be dropped in terms of fair police unions, because right now police unions are highly in favor of policing departments and make it so that the average citizen is grossly just ill-equipped to combat a police assault, harassment, injury, or even a death. And some of those things include, and I'm reading this off of the Campaign Zero website, allowing officers to wait up to 48 hours or more before being interrogated after an incident, preventing investigators from pursuing multiple allegations at once. Some contracts can make it so that the chief of the police has the sole power to punish officers, preventing an officer from not being investigated over 100 days after an offense. That last one is particularly interesting because it's similar to sexual assault scandals. Most people don't like to come out right away because they fear that they'll be retaliated against. So the same logic applies here when after contacting policing. Sometimes they've been so roughed up, they're afraid that it will happen again if they happen to get pulled over. They're afraid that their name will get out there. So people like to wait a little bit before they feel more comfortable about going to the police. Now, ideally, people would go right away, but it's the nature of humans to wait until they feel comfortable, until they feel safe. In an environment where they don't feel comfortable or safe, it's very likely that people are going to wait hundreds of days in order to wait and to go to the police departments to report an incident. However, I personally find the biggest offense in terms of police union contracts having to be that what happens after an officer leaves the department. In some departments around this country, and the most heinous example is in Washington, D.C., after a police officer leaves the police department, their record of incidents will be expunged. So, for instance, if a police officer used to work for the Washington, D.C. Police Department and were to leave after being reported for something they knowingly did, so, for instance, they physically harassed a person in Washington, D.C., what happens is their record of that incident gets expunged. It's no longer on the record, and it's not even a waiting period that must occur. In some localities, such as San Antonio and Louisville, you have to wait 1 to 2 years in order for your record to get expunged. However, in DC, it's upon request, and that's something written into union contracts. However, another big offense is the lack of accountability that is mandated by these policing unions, and particularly in the contracts. And it's a prevention of a given department's discriminatory records to being released to the public via the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, which is typically done for journalism and requesting statistics and things of that sort from government offices. In this case, it would be the police department. So the police don't have to, in some instances, provide those numbers, provide those statistics to journalists looking to inquire. And basically what that does, as you can assume, is it does not allow for community oversights and allows for no public scrutiny in a case that a police department has done something wrong, has done something heinous, per se. So, as I wrap up this video, I hope that you all took away something. As I said, I'm going to have the full list of Campaign Zero reforms in the description of this video. It's a phenomenal website that allows you to really get an in-depth look at policing around this country, what reforms should be made. It gives you a bunch of statistics. It's a really great website to utilize. I fully suggest checking it out. It's going to be in the description, perhaps the pinned comment. This coming Friday, I'm going to be interviewing State Senator Declan O'Scanlan, a harsh critic of Governor Phil Murphy in New Jersey. It's a very exciting episode. I spoke to him last week. It's a great episode. I can't wait to upload that and show you guys what he has to say. But for now, I hope that all of you are being well. If you're going out, staying safe, wearing a mask, social distancing when you can. But for now, be well, stay safe, and have yourselves a good one.